Gonzaga's beat UCLA 4 years in a row. What do they need to do to extend that streak and end the non-conference slate on a high note?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, the NFL playoffs are almost here, but it is not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, we're closing out the show and the week, taking a look at the Zag women's basketball team taking on Oregon State this Saturday on ESPN2. But first, we're going to get folks prepped for the big matchup between Mark Few's club against Mick Cronin and the UCLA Bruins coming up this Saturday. Gonzaga takes on UCLA, the last non-conference game of the regular season. It'll be at 1 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday, December 28th. It'll be broadcast on Fox, so shouldn't have any issues getting to watch this game. I know we've been dealing with that a little bit lately with some of the ESPN Plus and different things of that nature, especially last week with those two games against Bucknell and Nichols, but hopefully that is sorted out. This game was initially set to be at 5 p.m. Pacific time, part of a doubleheader, the West Coast Showdown, the other game being Grand Canyon and University of San Diego. That game ultimately, this game, I should say, between Gonzaga and UCLA got moved to 1 p.m. as opposed to being at 5 p.m. in order to accommodate a new schedule for the NFL game between the Arizona Cardinals and Los Angeles Rams. So that actually means that this game is going to jump ahead of the Grand Canyon San Diego game. It was initially going to be the second game in that doubleheader. So that does mean that, in fact, Gonzaga and UCLA will play the first ever college basketball game at the Intuit Dome in Inglewood, the new home of the Los Angeles Clippers. From everything we have seen, if you have watched any of the Clippers games, if you have just seen any videos of the arena, I watched a tutorial of this place. It is incredible. It's a really, really cool arena. For folks who are going to this game, I think it's going to be a really, really fun place to watch some basketball. Hopefully, we'll get to hear some stories from those of you who are at the game. It's going to look great on TV as well. The Grand Canyon San Diego game, for those interested in watching both, is expected to tip off shortly afterwards. It's listed at 3:30. I'm sure it'll just be 20 to 30 minutes after Gonzaga UCLA wraps up. The Zags have had a lot of success against UCLA lately. 7 of the last 9 games have been won by Gonzaga, including each of the last 4 seasons. These two teams have squared off. Gonzaga won last year in a really ugly game in the Maui Invitational. They, of course, won 2 NCAA tournament games against them recently. First being the incredibly epic Jalen Suggs 37-foot bank shot game winner to send Gonzaga to the national championship in 2021, one of the greatest shots in college basketball history. The other being Julian Strother hitting a similar game-winning shot against UCLA to send Gonzaga to the Elite Eight in 2023. There is a lot of history between these two programs historically, and even more history really just in the last half decade between Mark Few and Mick Cronin. It is a fun West Coast rivalry. Always good to see this game on the schedule. Part of a 3-year series between Gonzaga and UCLA. So we're going to see a lot more of these two teams squaring off in the future. Let's meet this UCLA team, 10-2 on the year right now, 2-0 already in Big Ten conference play. Their 2 opponents so far in the Big Ten have been Washington and Oregon. They beat UW at home, and they went on the road to knock off Dana Altman and the Oregon Ducks. Their only losses of the season, they lost way back on November 8th, the second game of the year for UCLA. They lost to New Mexico, a good team that hasn't played as well lately, so that loss is kind of aging poorly for UCLA, but I rarely judge teams for losing early season games against good opponents just because teams are still kind of trying to figure themselves out. What we've seen from UCLA lately has been very, very good, with the exception of the most recent half of basketball played by the UCLA Bruins. That was the second half against North Carolina. North Carolina has been down by 10 or more points against every high major opponent they've played this year, which doesn't really apply to the specific game, but it's just a unique fact that I thought I would toss out there. But it was relevant, of course, against UCLA as North Carolina was down 10 plus. I think they were down as much as 16 in the second half. North Carolina stormed all the way back, just like they did against Kansas, even though they eventually lost that game. In this case, they managed to storm all the way back and pick up a victory. So for UCLA, New Mexico, not a great loss, but also not a terrible loss. North Carolina, not a great loss either. It's just North Carolina is not ranked right now. They're not playing all that well, but neither of these I would consider bad losses for UCLA. It looks like two unranked losses, but it's really not as concerning as I think it could be, especially when you consider this team has a true road win over Oregon, and they have what is not actually a road win over Arizona, but they beat Arizona in Phoenix. So it is a pseudo road victory for Mick Cronin and the Bruins against an Arizona team that is also struggling this year, but still managed to find a way. UCLA managed to find a way to win that one as opposed to the game against North Carolina. KenPom has UCLA 17th in the country right now. As typical for a Mick Cronin team, they are buoyed primarily by their elite defense. The adjusted defensive efficiency for this club is 4th in the country right now. Offense is down at 60th, so much better on the defensive end, but not exactly bad on the offensive end. Certainly not as bad as they were last year, where they just really, really struggled to score the basketball. Their tempo is 253rd. That's about where you'd expect them to be. They're not exactly a up and down tempo type team. The main reason this team is much better offensively this year than they were last year is they've added to the front court in a much needed way. Transfer forwards Tyler Bilodeau and Eric Dailey are leading the team in scoring. Two newcomers, Bilodeau from Oregon State, Eric Dailey from Oklahoma State. Bilodeau averaging 15 points, 5.3 boards, 1.3 assists, shooting 54% on two-pointers and 43% from beyond the arc. He dropped 26 points, a career high against North Carolina, was a very good player for the Beavers, and a really nice pickup for Mick Cronin in the transfer portal. 6'9" forward from Kennewick, Washington, so certainly has some added juice to potentially want to beat this Gonzaga team, being somebody who grew up in the area. He operates in the high post really efficiently. They love to bring him out. They do a lot of dribble handoff actions, a lot of motion offense at the top of the key. Bilodeau's ability to come away from the rim, catch the ball, kind of operate in a DeMontis Sabonis type role, NBA Sabonis, I should say, not really what he did at Gonzaga, but being able to make the entry pass, shoot the three-point shot, shoot a jumper, put the ball on the deck, continue to pass the ball. Like he's got a lot of versatility in what he brings to this team. Meanwhile, Eric Dailey averaging about 11 points, 4.5 boards, 1.2 steals per game, an efficient scorer as well, 60% on two-pointers, 42% from beyond the arc. Gets in foul trouble. We'll talk about that a little later in the show, but is a very, very quality player. There's also some familiar faces on this UCLA roster, Dom Harris being the most notable one. Dom, of course, began his college basketball career at Gonzaga, was a part of the infamous Tricky Trio alongside the aforementioned Jalen Suggs and Julian Strother. It is weird, to say the least, that these three players who were all connected for their time at Gonzaga, two of them have hit epic game-winning three-point shots against UCLA in the NCAA tournament. The other one currently plays for UCLA. I don't know that means anything. It is just a unique kind of connection between the three of those folks. Dom Harris not playing particularly well or very much for UCLA at this point in the season. He's played 9 games for the Bruins, has picked up some DNP CDs, aka did not play coach's decision. In those 9 games, he's playing less than 8 minutes per game, averaging just 1.3 points. He has taken 16 three-point attempts in his 9 games and has made just 2 of them. It has been a very rough season for Dom. It is unfortunate to see his college career coming to an end like this. Hopefully he'll find a way to rebound and have a strong second half of the year, although we can wait for after this game for him to start having that kind of success. Trent Perry, another well-known name for folks who follow Gonzaga recruiting. Perry was a target for Gonzaga. He actually committed initially to USC, then decommitted when USC had a coaching change. And ended up at UCLA. Gonzaga was kind of in on him both times. In 12 games for UCLA as a true freshman, he's playing about 14 minutes a night, averaging 5 points, 2 boards, shooting about 44% from 3. So Zags will get a chance to see Trent Perry and potentially Dom Harris in action this Saturday. We'll get more into some of the details and what Gonzaga needs to do. I also want to mention the guard play for UCLA. A lot of the same guards from last year, in particular Sebastian Mack and Dylan Andrews, who really struggled offensively last year. They're a bit better this year, but they're still not super consistent. Lazar Stefanovic has not played as well this year as he did last year, but this team did bring in a pair of solid guards in Sky Clark and Kobe Johnson. Both have shown flashes of being very productive, but haven't exactly ironed out that consistency either. So Mick Cronin's got a much better front court, at least offensively, which has helped this team. They're a great defensive team, but there's still some inconsistency offensively from the backcourt, and I think that's an area Gonzaga could potentially exploit. And that's what I want to talk about in the second segment here, because one of the things UCLA is the best at in the entire country is generating turnovers. They do this literally better than any other D1 team in the land. We're going to talk about why taking care of the basketball is so critical for Gonzaga, as well as a couple other keys to a victory coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Because that definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's kind of like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 per year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services that I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton of money. Plus, with Rocket Money's goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every single month. So folks, cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are still talking about Gonzaga's big-time final non-conference matchup of the 24-25 season, taking on Mick Cronin and the UCLA Bruins this Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific time at the Intuit Dome in Inglewood, California. We talked a little bit about this UCLA team, some new faces, some returning faces, some familiar faces for Gonzaga fans. Now we want to talk specifically about what Gonzaga needs to do to win this basketball game, because there's no doubt Gonzaga needs to win this basketball game. They played 3 super marquee opponents in the month of December. They lost the first 2. They need to win this third one. They need to beat UCLA, get them back on track, carry some momentum into the WCC season. They're fortunate that their wins over Baylor and San Diego State and Arizona State, they have a quality resume already, but without those wins over Kentucky or UConn, this game against UCLA becomes very important. Key number 1, we teased it at the end there. The Zags need to take care of the basketball. UCLA's turnover rate is 26.9%. That leads the country by a considerable amount. They generate turnovers at a higher rate than any other team in the country, and it's not particularly close. They also lead the country in non-steal turnover percentage, which is not a surprise. If you're going to lead the country in overall turnover rate, you probably do a good job of generating turnovers that aren't just from getting steals. So that would be shot clock violations, traveling calls on the opposing teams, like various other ways that you can force a turnover that aren't just getting a steal. So they lead the country in turnover percentage. They lead the country in non-steal turnover percentage. Beyond that, they're also 16th in the country in steal percentage. So they just do everything well in terms of generating turnovers. They're as good at it as anybody in the country. They generate steals. They get turnovers that aren't steals. Really, really good job. So for Gonzaga, really the key here is not just for the whole team collectively to take care of the basketball. Ryan Nembhard needs to bring his A game. He needs to bring the best possible version of Ryan Nembhard basketball to Inglewood, California on Saturday. That's what they need. There's more than that. Obviously, Nembhard doesn't have the ball quite every single time down the floor. He does have the ball quite a bit, but for Gonzaga, the bigs have had a lot of turnover issues this year. We've seen it from really all 4 of the bigs at times. E.K. Huff, Greg, and Michael Ajayi have had turnover issues. A lot of it is just kind of unnecessary turnovers, getting an offensive rebound and bringing the ball down, or catching a pass and bringing the ball down where a guard can come in and swipe it away. Committing offensive fouls is a stupid way to turn the basketball over. We've seen that. The bigs not recognizing a double team fast enough, spinning or dribbling into traffic and getting tied up. We've seen errant entry passes. That's been a problem for pretty much all of the bigs who've made those entry passes at some point have thrown it a little too high out of bounds or just thrown it to the other team. The Zags need to avoid those kinds of turnovers. You're not going to get zero, especially not against this UCLA team, but you need to limit those mistakes. The last thing you can do in this game if you want to win is give UCLA free opportunities with the basketball. Dead ball turnovers are brutal, but also live ball turnovers where they get out in transition, get an easy bucket because you threw the ball to the wrong player or whatever. Those are going to be killer in a game like this. So that is a huge area for Gonzaga. And they've been great in this area. This is not something that, UCLA is really good at this and Gonzaga struggles. No, Gonzaga's been great at not turning the basketball over. This has been a huge strength for the Zags. It's two teams who are very, very good in these respective areas, kind of an unstoppable force, immovable objects type situation here for this game. If Gonzaga can avoid the unnecessary turnovers and UCLA can't get as many turnovers as they're used to, that's a big, big advantage for the Zags. Another area that's kind of goes hand in hand with that, and it's always a key against UCLA, it's always a key against St. Mary's, as a spoiler for future episodes, you got to dictate the pace. UCLA wants to play at their pace. They're not quite at the bottom. They're not like they're not even in the 300s in terms of tempo at KenPom right now. They play a little quicker than they have in the past, but they still play much, much slower than Gonzaga does. Gonzaga's average possession length this season, according to KenPom, is 15.4 seconds. That's the 22nd fastest in the country. UCLA is holding opponents on average to 17.9 seconds per possession. That's 267th in the country, meaning that teams take a long time when they have the basketball against UCLA because of their defense, because they can't get good looks. Meanwhile, Gonzaga is often trying to get the ball up, quicker than almost anybody in the country, top 25 in terms of the shortest possessions that they have the ball. What we know from Mick Cronin and UCLA is that they're going to prevent Gonzaga from getting out in transition. They're going to do everything they can, getting back, not getting as many offensive rebounds potentially, flying back in transition, not letting Ryan Nembhard get out and get going down in those situations. They also don't turn the ball over all that much. Turnovers are obviously an easy way, especially live ball turnovers, easy way to get out in transition and score. UCLA doesn't do a ton of that. They're going to really try to stop the Zags. They're going to make Gonzaga beat them with their half-court offense. There are certainly plenty of ways for Gonzaga to beat them with their half-court offense, but getting out in transition is key. And more than that, it's not letting UCLA dictate the pace they want to play. If you let UCLA bring the ball up really slow and you let them come out and set up their offense and get situated and look for their shots, like you're allowing them to dictate how the game is played, and then you're forced to adjust to their style. You don't want that. When Gonzaga's at their best, they are setting the pace. They are setting the tempo. The other team has to adjust to them. And I think that's what we need to see from Gonzaga. It's not just on offense, it's on defense as well. It's putting pressure on UCLA, not letting them get comfortable, not letting them get situated where they can run their slow, methodical, paced offense. Key number 3 for Gonzaga is to attack the rim and get to the free throw line. UCLA is great defensively, top 4 in the country according to adjusted defensive efficiency at KenPom, but they do foul a lot. And hopefully this game will not go the same way that the last time these two teams played each other in Maui last year. Hopefully it doesn't go that way, because that game was a disaster to watch. Gonzaga won, but it was a foul fest constantly. It was just a slog of a basketball game. I tried to forget about it. Many of you who watched it probably tried to forget about it too. Drown yourself in turkey, since it was right after Thanksgiving. But that was an ugly, ugly game. But UCLA still does have they still commit a lot of fouls. They commit about 18 fouls per game. They give up about 18 free throws per game on average. Meanwhile, Gonzaga's taken about 21 free throws per game on average. So this is a game where Gonzaga should get to the line. They should get to the line a lot. And good news for the Zags, they're 7th in the country in free throw percentage. They're shooting free throws at 81% clip. Every single player in Gonzaga's rotation is 75% or higher from the free throw line. All 4 bigs, all 4 guards, 75% or better from the free throw line. Meanwhile, for UCLA, they have 6 players who average 4 or more fouls per 40 minutes. That includes Ade Mara, their backup center, 7'3" big man who averages 5.4 fouls per 40 minutes. Eric Dailey's at 4.5. Trent Perry's at 4.5. Lazar Stefanovic is at 4.4. William Kyle, their backup big, is at 4.4. Sky Clark, their starting point guard, is at 4. So That's a lot of guards who commit a lot of fouls. It's not surprising. They generate a lot of steals. They're out there, they're hand checking a little bit. They're going to commit fouls. To me, this feels like a big Caliph battle game. We know we know UCLA is going to do everything they can to prevent Gonzaga from getting out in transition, which is where Caliph battle has been best utilized by Gonzaga at this point. But what I want to see is if we are in the half-court offense, and if UCLA is having success stopping our bigs, if it's not a good Graham Ike game, if they're doubling and our bigs aren't able to get good looks around the rim, then you get the ball to Caliph battle and you let him get right side drive, go to the rim. Constant pressure on the rim, getting to the free throw line, converting at the charity stripe, forcing UCLA to play more of their depth. We want Dom Harris on the floor. We want Trent Perry on the floor. They're the two names we know, but we want them on the floor because they're not starting guards for this team. If they're on the floor, it means Kobe Johnson is sitting. It means Sky Clark is sitting. It means Dylan Andrews or Sebastian Mack is sitting. And if Gonzaga is generating a bunch of points at the free throw line, that is a huge, huge sign for them to be successful in this contest. Key number 4 is defensive communication. One of the things about UCLA, having watched them a few times this year, is they're very patient on offense, and it's not unlike UConn. It's not unlike St. Mary's in that style. Now, UConn's offense is much more complex than what we've seen UCLA run this year, but UCLA is patient. If they're not seeing the opportunities, they're not going to just jack up shots quickly in the shot clock. They're not just going to force it down low and let somebody go to work. They are patient. They do a lot of dribble handoffs. They do a lot of motion offense at the top of the key. You'll see bigs flashing. They're looking to make entry passes. They're looking to throw over the top. But if it's not there, they're just swinging it around and around and around and around. And I envision multiple scenarios, and this is what we want to avoid, where Gonzaga plays great defense for 27 seconds. They hedge on their screens, they communicate, they switch appropriately, they cut drivers off, they keep UCLA from getting any good looks until the last 5 seconds of the shot clock. And then, Sky Clark or Dylan Andrews or somebody gets the ball, put their head down, drives to the rim, the defender lets them get past them. Gonzaga doesn't have enough rim protection, and they either score and get fouled, or they score easily, or they kick it out to a shooter and get an open three-point shot. And if UCLA is continually scoring with 5 or less seconds on the shot clock, that's bad news for Gonzaga. You need to consistently communicate. You need to bury your head, and you need to be ready to play good defense for the entirety of the shot clock, because that is how UCLA is going to wear you down, and that is how they're going to beat you. Have to avoid giving them those last second shots, last second looks at the rim after playing great defense for the entirety of the possession. Key number 5, it's a key in almost every single game. We buried it a little farther down because I thought some of the other stuff was more important, but feed the paint. Paint touches. Vital in this game. Ejim Mara is 7'3", but he only plays about 9 minutes per game. He doesn't play very much. He's not a great rim protector. He's a foul merchant, but he's not a super dynamic defensive player for this team. There are other bigs. Tyler Bilodeau is 6'9". Eric Dailey is 6'8". They just don't have a ton of size in the front court outside of Ejim Mara, who's just not playing all that much. Getting UCLA's bigs in foul trouble would be a really critical way to win this basketball game. We already talked about attacking the rim, but having Gonzaga's bigs, Graham Ike is really good at this. Really good at this. We talked about this on a recent episode. Braden Huff and Graham Ike have played about the same number of minutes per game this year, the same number of total minutes on the season. Braden Huff has attempted 12 free throws. Graham Ike has attempted 69. That is a massive difference in terms of what they're able to do successfully. If Graham Ike can draw contact and put either Bilodeau or Dailey on the bench early in this game, that is a big advantage for Gonzaga going forward in this contest. It doesn't have to be Ike. Obviously, feed the paint when Braden Huff's in. Feed the paint when Ben Gregg is in. Michael hasn't really been a big post-up player for Gonzaga, but you could utilize him there if he has the right matchup for it. But get paint touches. Score around the rim, draw that contact, and get to the free throw line. Getting UCLA's bigs in foul trouble, forcing them to rely on their guards. Because again, Bilodeau and Dailey are this team's leading scorers. If either of them is on the bench, they have to rely more on their backcourt. Their backcourt not consistently good offensively. When they're on, they're on. When they're not on, this team can really struggle. And if Bilodeau's on the bench and the guards aren't having a great game, That's a huge advantage for Gonzaga. So that's a huge area where I want to see, and we know we're going to. It would be a very unique game if Gonzaga went out there and wasn't constantly looking for paint touches every possession down in the half court. That's how Mark Few's run this thing for 25 years. So we're going to see plenty of paint touches, but for the Zags, it's about the bigs avoiding, putting the ball on the deck and getting it taken away from them. It's avoiding the stupid turnovers. It's avoiding panicking when a double team comes and throwing a bad pass. It's about getting looks around the rim, drawing that contact if you can, and getting to the free throw line. But we're going to switch gears here to close out the show. Lise Fortier and the Zag women are facing Oregon State on Saturday at the Kennel. It's a big-time matchup. It's on ESPN2. Neither team is playing as well as I'm sure ESPN and the WCC would have hoped, but we're still going to talk about what's coming up in this matchup here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the conference college hoops action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that bet wins. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And we have lines out officially for Gonzaga UCLA. As I'm recording right now, the Zags are opening at -4.5 to win this basketball game. The over-under is set at 148.5. We talked a lot about who's going to set the pace, who's going to dictate the tempo in this game. If you feel like it's going to be the Zags, betting the over on that line might be a really good way to go. If you feel like the Zags are going to win this one, then definitely look at the money line or, again, that 4.5-point spread. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you do throw down a $5 bet and it wins. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show, talking about the other Gonzaga basketball game taking place on Saturday, unfortunately at the same time as the men's game, as Lise Fortier and the Zag women host Oregon State, the McCarthy Athletic Center on Saturday at 1 p.m. on ESPN2. It's always fun when both the Zags are on TV on major networks on the same day. It's not as fun when they're at the same time. We had a day earlier this year where we had Gonzaga women and Gonzaga men back-to-back 2-hour segments on ESPN. That was really fun. But this one, it's a bit more of a bummer that these two games would be going on at the same time. It's just how the cookie crumbles with the men's game getting moved to 1 p.m. But for those of you who have the ability to screen it, if you're on YouTube TV, if you just got dual monitors, whatever it may be on Saturday, going to be worth checking out both of these contests. This should be a fun one here. The records are going to make it seem like, oh, is this really that exciting of a game? But I think there's a lot of intrigue here. I still think Gonzaga and Oregon State are two of the best teams in the WCC. Both these teams made the NCAA tournament last year. Oregon State, in fact, went to the Elite Eight. A tremendous, successful season last year for Scott Ruck and the Beavers. Unfortunately, the dissolvement of the Pac-12, even though it is coming back in a couple of years, the previous Pac-12 was such a dominant women's basketball conference with Oregon and, of course, Stanford and UCLA. And I mean, everybody really, that was just a really, really good women's basketball conference. And with the Oregon State moving from that conference to WCC, which we've talked about outside of Gonzaga, has been incredibly weak for the last half decade or so. There was a mass exodus of talent from Oregon State. Players hit the transfer portal. Some players graduated. Some players just moved on naturally. But this is basically a brand new roster. They still have Scott Ruck. He's a phenomenal coach. But this team is not nearly the team that they were previously. They're 4-8 on the year. They're already 0-1 in conference play. They lost at Pacific. 66-63 was the final score there. One of the reasons I think this game is going to be so exciting, and net is not necessarily predictive, but the net rankings right now for women's basketball have Gonzaga at 161st, and they have Oregon State at 160th. Can't get closer than that, folks. So there's a good indication that this could end up being a very close game. Again, 4-8 for the Beavers. The Lady Zags are 6-7. They're 1-1 in conference play. They got beat by 15 on the road against San Francisco, but they turned around and picked up a win over San Diego after that. Meanwhile, the Beavers, they've played a really competitive schedule. And it's really worth acknowledging that a 4-8 record certainly doesn't look good, but their first 5 games against D1 opponents this year, they lost all of them. So they started 0-5 against D1 teams, but they were at Colorado State. They've also played Minnesota. They lost at Arizona State. They lost at Illinois, who's 22nd in the country, and they lost against UConn, who's number 2 in the country. no real shame in any of those losses right there. They have a win over Boston College, a win over Grambling, but lately they've lost 3 of their last 4. They lost at Pacific, as we mentioned. They also lost at home against UC Irvine, beat Western Kentucky by 22, and then lost at home to Miami out of the ACC by 5 points. So Beavers struggling right now, struggling 22% from 3, 22% from beyond the arc. That is 353rd in the country. They're one of the 10 worst shooting teams in all of college basketball right now. They also are only shooting 39.5% from the field. That's 229th. They turn the ball over 18 times a game. There's a lot about this Oregon State team that this Zag team can take advantage of, can exploit. I don't know if they're going to run a zone, but certainly force this team to beat you from beyond the arc, which they haven't proven capable of doing. One of the things that Oregon State does have an advantage of is size. They have 2 very big players who are going to be a problem for Lisa Fortier's club, notably Kelsey Reese, who is 6'5" senior. She started her career at Utah, spent the last 2 years with the Beavers, or the last year, and then this season with Oregon State. She's averaging 11 points, 7.6 boards, and about 2 assists per game. They also have a backup center, Sela Heidi, who is 6'7". She's averaging 8 points, a little under 6 boards, 1.3 blocks. She leads the conference and is near the top in the country with a field goal percentage of 75.4%. When you're 6'7" in the women's basketball game, you tend to get a lot of good looks around the rim, so not a huge shock there. But going to be fun to see the matchup between Reese and Yvonne Ejim. Of course, Ejim averaging over 20 points per game, over 8 rebounds, looking once again like one of the best, not just mid-major players in college basketball, one of the best players in college basketball, period. She's going to have a monster game for Gonzaga to pick up a win here against the Beavers. Move to 2-1 in conference play ahead of their Monday night matchup against Pepperdine. The men and the women both playing Pepperdine on Monday, December 30th. The men will be at Firestone Fieldhouse in Malibu. The women will be at home on ESPN Plus against Pepperdine on the women's side. So it should be fun to see how these 2 teams play against former Pac-12 opponents in UCLA and Oregon State on Saturday, and then how they both look against Pepperdine on Monday. We'll have recaps of these games for Monday's episode, as well as a preview for that game against Pepperdine. We got a lot of fun stuff coming your way as we get into the new year as well. We'll talk resolutions for some of the players on these Gonzaga rosters. We'll also talk getting you ready for the games against Portland on January 2nd. All sorts of fun stuff coming your way here as we get through the end of 2024 and into the start of 2025. It's the last episode of the week, though, folks, so thank you so much for making this show your first listen and your first watch of the day. I appreciate every single one of you. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll look forward to talking to you again early next week. As always, go Zags.